Who is the real Alexey Navalny? I don't know whether I'm the best person to say, but I certainly have a little bit of an insight. If you check out the documentaries, he seems to be the protagonist in a thriller, poisoned by the despotic ruler in the Kremlin, ultimately killed at that ruler's whim as a gesture of perhaps defiance when his wife, Yulia Navalny, another strong character, was invited to speak to the European Parliament. She did so on the day of his death, and then later in Strasbourg to astonishing effect, saying, "Don't be so boring. Don't be so boring. Be interesting. Be funny." And that really is the message of her husband. Be significant. Don't be boring. Be significant. And even in prison, Navalny's humour, his good-natured banter was evident. Getting gaunter by the month, looking like Ivan Denisovich, wretchedly thin, and like something out of a Goya painting, but still smiling, blue-eyed, twinkling. He was charismatic. There's no question about it. Every so often my Russian friends would talk about him, and it took a while before I realised that we'd actually met, because he had an office in the same block as some people that I knew. So I think I had a vested interest in what he did, but I cannot say I understood or even particularly expressed had any great sympathy for him. The events in Navalny's history went on while I was in Russia, and it wasn't something that I was particularly focused on. I knew of Narod, and I knew of the Transneft embezzlement scheme that he'd called out in 2010. But it was the FBK, the Anti-Corruption League, that I think became the drive towards his identity. That interested me. And of course, the irony is that when he called out embezzlement, it was embezzlement that he was attacked on. And I found people would send me videos on YouTube that some of them, quite a lot of the early ones, irritated me. His comment about insects was a trope I'd heard before, and it didn't work for me. Also, I don't think it was him. I think there was a brightness and a warmth to Navalny, which didn't quite come across in that video, and I think he was pandering to particular groups. It's always bad to pander. And I also never understood the details of the arrest in the lumberyard thing. It was clearly a trumped-up charge based on the fact that he was aiding the governor while he was working in some sort of lumberyard. He was in charge of the state-owned wood company in Kirov. And then 2 years later, he faced charges for misappropriating $500,000, and he was sentenced to 5 years in prison and then released on appeal, and after public protests, and then on the back of that, he ran for mayor of Moscow and got 27% of the total vote. He didn't win, but he made an extremely good and extremely valiant effort, and he, as I say, the charisma won out over everything else. And in fact, I think it was really only after I left Russia, and people were saying, "But you must have met him," and I thought, well, yeah. And it was only then that that his character hit me, and his importance and his resilience. And he was certainly poisoned on the flight from Tomskin in 2020. But he may have been poisoned in 2019 as well, when he was held in custody for 30 days after protesting about disqualification from standing in Russian municipal elections. But I was there in Russia. I remember the green paint attack, which damaged his eyesight in 2017, and the closure of the FBK in 2018. But as I say, it wasn't really until I had left Russia and the videos about Putin's palaces came out that I understood what a force he was, and how he had used the humour, the wit, the intelligence that were undoubtedly a part of his character, that were undoubtedly a part of who he was, to energise support. And the West, I think, wrongly identified him as the opposition to Putin. I don't think that was ever really the case, and nor was he ever the sort of Western stooge that Kremlin trolls would want us to believe, even on YouTube, even here. He was a Russian patriot whose heart was in Russia. And that, I think, was good enough reason to justify his return in 2021 in the January, after surviving poisoning with Novichok, because he was deeply Russian. And when he was taken to Siberia, that sort of Russian humour came out. Seriously, where's the guard? When he was poisoned, he said, well, that's so stupid. And the efforts to trap him in hospital in Omsk when his wife couldn't visit him, in death when his body was detained, in the Polar Wolf when even his letters were detained. And yet each time, that there's a sense that he was laughing at these people who are making such an effort, that he was more intelligent, more humorous, more Russian than they were, more patriotic, more ready to meet and greet ordinary Russian people. He spoke their language, and that was what Putin was trying to stop. The crowds. When he flew back to Moscow, when he was due to meet a crowd of well-wishers at the airport, they'd assembled, but his plane was diverted, and maybe then he lost the protection that the crowd would have provided, but he was arrested, dragged into court to serve the 2-year sentence, which was then extended and extended on utterly spurious grounds, and you can hear his mind sort of twirling round and smiling at it all. What a huge amount of effort they're making. And I think that was his chief success, to mock and deride the Putin regime that's staffed by twits like Christo Grozhev, who described him as who described Navalny as the Bulgarian nerd with a laptop. Not so. The twits who thought their passwords would be impregnable. Moscow 1. Not so. They changed it to Moscow 2. Very safe. And he mocked by Navalny. And the twits also from the FSB, who trailed him, who were specialists in nerve agents. Of course they were going to get him. Not surprising that he was a victim of their efforts, but surprising that they failed at least once, possibly twice, to kill him, even if they got him in the end. He was charged in December 2020 for failing to attend probation meetings when he was actually recuperating, having got permission from Putin to go to recuperate in Germany after being poisoned with Novichok. It's a stuff of farce. And 2 weeks later, despite the charge, he was back in Russia to defy his accusers. And once in the system, then he was victimized by it. He was sentenced for the parole violation, and then saw that sentence extended for defaming Ignat Artemenko, an elderly war veteran who apparently he'd upset on social media in 2020. Oh, rubbish. And he was then sent to Pokrov and then Polar Wolf, worse than each other. And then the sentence was extended on grounds that he stole from his own anti-corruption foundation. Again, you know, the Russian administration of the Kremlin can't duck out, can't avoid the possibility of irony, embezzlement, and now you steal from your own anti-corruption foundation. I don't believe it at all. I just don't believe it. And a further 19 years added on extremism charges. Again, absurd. So perhaps when history is written, this will be his epitaph, that along with Zelensky, Navalny could see that absurdity, could see the humour in it, the irony, the humour that eludes Putin and his gang of henchmen. Because Putin is a small man, believe me, he's a small man who wants to be taken seriously, very small. And not, I think, blessed with Gove-like propensities. Mr. Putin's car is enormous, after all. I mean, you remember the line in Mrs. Doubtfire where she takes off the thing in front of the car, and it's a very big car. Oh dear, it's a very big car. You know what they say about people with big cars. And in Mr. Putin's case, there's so much effort to compensate for something in the Kremlin, isn't it? So much effort. Hey, take off my shirt. And so that's when I realized how much I like Navalny, because I realized that was Putin's weakness, that he doesn't like to be exposed or mocked. And so when I go to the kitchen for Russian dumplings, pelmeni, I open the fridge, there's a sneaky voice from within calling out "Smig." I open up the fridge and the hand drops out. Boom. Privyet, sneers Putin from the freezer department, from the compartment nestled up to the Smedley peas, frozen peas, and I think, yeah, that's what Navalny inspires. Navalny inspires us to mock Mr. Putin, and that's what we should do. That is the message of Navalny. To mock Putin and to expose his shortcomings. He's not so short. Not so short. He's not so short.